My son didn't hang up properly. I heard everything. She can't stay alone anymore, Jessica said. She's slipping. Then David answered, low and tired, she's a burden. I didn't make a sound. But inside, something cracked open. I sold the house. $900,000. When they flew back from Vancouver, their arms were full of souvenirs and smiles. But the keys didn't work. There was a letter waiting for them at the door. And when they read it, they started shouting. That's when I knew. This was only the beginning. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're joining me from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the night before it all changed. It was a Thursday. I remember because the soup I was finishing had been made on Tuesday, cabbage and carrot with a bit of lentil, my husband's favorite. He used to say it tasted better after sitting a day or two. He's been gone almost 2 years, but I still make it the same way. I still make too much. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood. Old houses do that when they're holding on to something. Or maybe it was just me projecting again. I sat at the edge of the kitchen table, spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl, watching the light above the stove flicker ever so slightly. A storm had passed earlier, and the windows were still fogged from the rain. The phone rang just as I was rinsing my dish in the sink. The screen lit up, David. I dried my hands quickly, heart catching a little like it always did when he called. My only son. I pressed the green button. Hi, Mom, he said, his voice wrapped in warmth. How are you doing tonight? Oh, I said, easing myself into the armchair in the corner by the kitchen window. Just finished some leftover soup. About to sit down and maybe watch that gardening show I like. Still watching that, he chuckled. You've seen every episode twice. I like the way the host talks to the plants, I said. It's peaceful. He laughed again, softer this time. There was a rustling sound on his end, like he was moving something or someone else was nearby. You eating enough? He asked. Remember, I showed you how to use the grocery app. I'm managing, sweetheart, I said. Had a bit of a scare yesterday, though. What happened? His voice sharpened. Left the kettle on too long. The smell of burnt water filled the whole place. But I caught it before anything bad happened. A pause. I could picture the crease between his brows. He got that from me. Always worrying before asking. Mom, he said gently, maybe it's time we talk about getting someone to help check in on you. Just once or twice a week. David, I said quickly, I'm fine. Really? Still sharp as ever. I just had a moment. Well, Jessica and I have been thinking. That's when I heard her voice in the background. Muffled, but close. We'll miss our dinner reservation, she said. Tell her we'll call her tomorrow. David sighed. We're heading out soon, he said to me. Business dinner. We're in Vancouver for a few days, remember? I remember, I said, trying not to sound disappointed. How's the trip? Same old, he said. Jess handles most of the pitches. I just smile and nod. I smiled. I could picture it. Him in a blazer, tie slightly crooked, trying to look more interested than he was. You be safe, I said. And send me a picture if you two go anywhere nice. I will, he said. Love you, Mom. Love you too. Then came the click. I reached to end the call, but something stopped me. Maybe my finger hesitated. Maybe the phone didn't register the press. Whatever it was, the line stayed open. And so did my ears. I didn't know, in that quiet, what I was about to hear. But for now, in that kitchen, in that moment, the lights were soft, the soup pot was empty, and my son had just told me he loved me. I leaned back into the armchair, my gaze drifting to the photo of my husband on the shelf. He looked so calm in that picture, one hand on my shoulder, the other holding a fishing rod. I smiled, just a little. I had no idea what was coming. But something, somewhere deep in me, must have known. Because as I reached to finally press the red button, my hand trembled. I hung up with a smile still on my lips. But I couldn't explain why my hand kept shaking. The screen had gone dark, but the line was still open. At first, I thought maybe the call had ended. The room was so quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full. I sat still in the kitchen armchair, the one with the faded red cushion, my hand still resting on the phone. Then I heard it. Jessica's voice came through, clear enough to recognize but low, like she didn't want to be overheard. "She forgot the kettle again," she said. "It's not safe anymore." My breath caught. David didn't respond right away. There was the faint rustling of fabric, the clink of keys, maybe. A zipper being pulled. Then, his voice. "I know. I know," he said, almost sighing the words. "She's slipping." I stared at the window above the sink, where the condensation from the storm earlier had begun to gather again. Tiny droplets forming slow rivers. Jessica's voice again, sharper this time. "We can't keep dancing around it. She needs supervision. We need to look into those places we talked about. The ones with staff on site. You said yourself she's forgetting things more often." Then came the sentence. The one that didn't just land. It sliced. "She's a burden." David said it. So plainly. So tiredly. Like he was simply stating the weather. I didn't move. Not even a blink. I just listened, as the two people I had loved most in the world continued talking like I wasn't there. Because in that moment, I wasn't. Not to them. Jessica lowered her voice, but not enough. "The housing market's still hot," she said. "Especially in that part of town. If we sell now, we could get close to 900. There was a pause. I could picture David rubbing the back of his neck the way he did when he was weighing things. He used to do that before ordering from menus, back when he was little and everything felt like a big decision. "We could finally put a down payment on the condo in Seattle," he said. "The one with the terrace view you liked." Jessica let out a soft laugh. Not cruel. Not mocking. Just relieved. "She won't resist," she said. "She trusts you completely. We'll say it's temporary. A vacation." Vacation. That word tasted bitter just thinking it. "She'd probably even thank us," Jessica added. "She's that naive." I felt something cold seep into my legs. My knees, my thighs, my stomach. A deep freeze that had nothing to do with the room. They were already planning. Already spending. Already making space for a future that didn't include me. "Helen won't suspect a thing," David said. "She's just happy when I call." I looked at the phone in my hand. The same one he used to call every Sunday. The one I had held to my chest after his wedding when he left for the city. The one I had clutched the night my husband died, waiting for my son to speak words I couldn't find myself. The air felt heavy. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick more slowly, like it, too, didn't want to intrude. "She's not going to fight us," David said. "Why would she? We'll be doing her a favor." A favor. My eyes burned. Not from tears, not yet. From something deeper. The kind of burn that comes when something inside you knows it can never go back to before. "She's not even using most of the house," Jessica went on. 2 empty bedrooms, an entire basement she hasn't touched in years. It's just wasted space. "She'll be better off," David added. "Smaller place. Cleaner. Less to worry about." There was a silence then. A final pause before I heard Jessica say something about reservations and how they were running late. More zippers. Footsteps. The sound of a door opening and closing. Then the line went dead. I was still holding the phone. I looked down at it, at the smooth glass screen, now blank again. Outside, the rain had started up once more. Not a storm, just a soft drizzle tapping against the windows. The kind of rain that makes you want to curl under a blanket with an old book and a cup of tea. But I didn't move. I sat in that chair, surrounded by the ticking of the clock, the humming fridge, and the fading scent of the soup I'd made 2 days ago. Jessica had called me naive. David had called me a burden. And together, they had planned to erase me from the home I had built with their father. From the life I had given to them without hesitation. I looked across the room to the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back. Older, yes. Softer around the edges. But still there. Still me. I had thought the call ended with, "I love you, Mom." But no. That was just the part they wanted me to hear. The rest? That was the truth. I set the phone down on the table, slowly, as if it were fragile. Maybe it was. Maybe I was. Or maybe I had just never really listened before. I stayed in that chair until the room went dim. Until the last light from the stove had flickered and faded. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too stunned. Too still. Like a wire had been cut somewhere deep inside. I had spent decades giving them everything I had. And now, they were calculating what they could get in return. They didn't know. Not yet. But I had heard every word. I had heard everything. I sat motionless. As if someone had pulled the plug from the inside. And they still didn't know I was listening. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a minute. I sat in the living room with the lights off, just me and the soft amber glow from the street lamp outside. It slipped in through the slats of the blinds, stretching thin shadows across the carpet, across the coffee table, across my lap. I didn't move. I didn't want to disturb the quiet. It was the kind of silence that lets memories crawl out from wherever they've been hiding. I looked around the room, slowly. The sofa against the far wall was older than David. Navy blue, with a small tear in the back corner from when he tried to climb it as a toddler wearing plastic fireman boots. He had a cape on, too. A red towel pinned around his neck. He used to run from room to room, arms out like wings, yelling, "Rescue mission." I hadn't thought about that in years. The wooden coffee table in front of me still had a faint ring from the night of his graduation. We had root beer floats, and he spilled his on the side. I told him it was fine, but I remember his face. That panic, that guilt. He was 17 and still looked like a little boy when he said sorry. My husband built that table. Just like he built most of this house. The floors, the moldings, the bookshelves that framed the fireplace. Every board, every nail, every careful measurement came from his hands. He used to joke that he didn't need a gym because this place was his workout. We moved in during the fall of '97. The paint was still fresh, and our son was only 9. He picked his own room, the one with the big bay window facing the backyard. He said it looked like a ship's bridge, like he could command the whole world from that view. And we let him believe that. That's what parents do. You build a world around them so they can feel safe enough to imagine anything. I ran my fingers over the arm of the recliner. The fabric had thinned over the years. This was where my husband would sit on Sunday afternoons, a mug of black coffee in one hand, the newspaper in the other. I could still hear the crinkle of the pages when he turned them. Still smell the faint scent of the furniture polish I used every Saturday morning. This house didn't just shelter us. It held us. Held birthdays, homework fights, late-night movies, mornings with burned toast and lukewarm coffee. It held grief too. The first time I shut the bedroom door after he died. The sound it made. How final it felt. And now it held betrayal. From my own son. I looked at the mantel above the fireplace. There was a picture of David at his wedding. He was in a gray suit, grinning, arms wrapped around Jessica. I had spent 6 months helping them plan that day. Even refinanced a small portion of the house so they could afford the venue she wanted. Lakeside, with fairy lights strung from trees. Cost more than I care to admit. But they called it their dream. And I wanted to give him dreams. There was another photo. David at 8, missing a front tooth, holding up a spelling bee ribbon. I remember sewing that little blue sweater he was wearing. I had stayed up late to finish it before picture day. I gave him everything I had. Every extra shift. Every late night balancing bills at this same dining table. I used to tell myself it was worth it. That all the skipped vacations, the worn-out shoes, the potlucks instead of restaurants were investments in his future. And now I was a burden. A liability to be managed. I pressed a hand to my chest. My breathing had changed and I hadn't even noticed. Shorter, quicker. Like my body was catching up to what my heart already knew. I got up and walked down the hallway. David's old room was still painted light green, the color he chose when he turned 13 and said baby blue was too childish. Posters from high school still clung to the walls. A faded college pennant hung crooked above the closet door. I opened the drawer of his old desk. Inside were papers he'd left behind. A report card from junior year. A thank you card I'd written when he got his first job and helped me fix the roof. He'd kept it. Folded neatly. That almost undid me. But then I remembered Jessica's voice. So sure. So certain I wouldn't resist. She's that naive, she had said. I closed the drawer. Maybe I was. Maybe I still believed that giving someone everything would mean they'd always remember the cost. I walked back into the hallway and stopped outside the door to our bedroom. My bedroom, now. I didn't go in. Not yet. Instead, I leaned against the wall and looked down at my feet. At the floor my husband had sanded and stained by hand. I remembered the way he had lined each tile along the edge, measuring twice, 3 times. The smell of varnish, the ache in his knees, the smile when it was done. Every inch of this place had a story. Every nail held something sacred. And now it was reduced to equity. To down payments and property value. I stared at the floor and whispered to no one. I used to think I was a good mother. But maybe I was just walking money. Maybe all they ever saw was a wallet that knew how to hug. Tears pricked at the edges of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not tonight. I turned away from David's room and walked back into the living room. The street lamp still cast that same soft glow, stretching across the room like it was trying to reach me. I sat down in the recliner again, folding my hands in my lap. I used to think I was a good mother. But maybe I was just walking money. It was still early when I got up. The sun had just started to spill through the thin curtains in the kitchen, casting long golden slats across the countertop. The kind of light that makes dust float in the air like snowflakes. I hadn't slept again, not really. My body had laid down, sure, but my mind hadn't stopped circling. I made a cup of tea. Not because I wanted one, but because that's what I always did in the mornings. It gave my hands something to do. The kettle whistled low and slow, and the smell of peppermint rose into the air, mixing with the faint scent of the furniture polish I'd used the day before. I carried the mug to the dining table. It was still set with a placemat on one end, out of habit. The other side hadn't been used since my husband died. I kept telling myself I should clear it, finally reclaim the space. But I never did. I sat down and stared at the drawer to my right. There was a small brass knob, dull from years of use. I hadn't opened it in months. Maybe more. But I knew what was inside. My hand hovered over it for a moment before I pulled it open. Inside was my husband's leather-bound notebook. Dark brown, worn at the corners. It still smelled like his aftershave. Faint, but there. That strange mix of cedar and something spicy I could never quite place. He used to write everything in it. Budgets. Repair notes. Grocery lists. Little reminders to call the plumber or check the roof before winter. But there were other things, too. Things he never meant for David to see. Maybe not even for me. I flipped through the pages slowly. There was the payment plan we used when we bought the house in '97. Every installment marked with his tidy handwriting. A few pages later, notes about David's college tuition, itemized down to the semester. He had drawn a little star next to the lines that said, "Spring, paid in full." Then I found it. A folded paper tucked into the spine. It was a copy of our house deed. My heart beat a little faster. His name was there. Mine too. Joint ownership, as it had always been. But he had underlined a sentence in pen. Upon death of one party, full ownership transfers to the surviving spouse. I held the paper in my hands like it was something sacred. It was. I remembered sitting across from him at this very table, years ago, just after his diagnosis. He'd pulled out this very notebook, flipping through pages, showing me what to do if he didn't make it through. "You have to know where everything is," he'd said. I tried to wave him off, told him we didn't need to talk about that yet. But he insisted. "You need to be prepared. And you need to be strong. Don't let anyone, make you feel small." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Not even David," he said quietly. I'd laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because the thought seemed impossible. "David's our baby," I said. He'd never. But he cut me off with that look of his. That knowing glance that said more than words ever could. "Don't let him mistake your love for weakness," he said. Not him. Not anyone. The memory hit like a wave. I could still feel his hand on mine, warm and rough. The same hand that had built our walls, held our son, held me through every season. I closed the notebook gently, ran my palm across the cover once, and set it down beside my tea. Something shifted in me. It wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was more like something waking up. Something that had been buried under years of soft smiles and sacrificed sleep. A part of me I hadn't felt since I stood toe to toe with a mortgage officer who said we couldn't afford this place, and I told him, "Watch me." I stood up, slowly. The tea had gone cold. I poured it down the sink. The faucet squeaked slightly when I turned it off. I'd been meaning to fix that. Later. Right now, I had something more important to do. I walked to the small file cabinet in the back room. The one we kept tucked beneath the window, beside the bookshelf. The one nobody ever paid attention to, including David. Inside were envelopes. Copies of everything we'd signed. Utility bills. Bank statements. Tax records going back a decade. I started pulling them out, one by one, laying them on the table like puzzle pieces. My husband always said, "You don't prepare for war during the battle. You do it in peacetime." And this? This was war. They thought I was naive. That I wouldn't notice. That I'd simply nod and follow when they said vacation, or facility, or just until you feel better. But they didn't know me. Not really. They knew the mother who packed lunches and paid bills and stayed quiet when they were tired. They didn't know the woman who held this family together with duct tape and hope. I took out my planner. Not digital. A small spiral-bound one with floral print and a ribbon for a bookmark. I flipped to the blank pages in the back. I started writing names. Lawyer. Real estate agent. Storage company. 3 steps ahead. That's what my husband would say. Plan like you've already been betrayed. Because now, I had. The pen moved steadily across the page. No more wondering. No more hoping they'd do the right thing. From now on, I would be the one deciding what came next. I looked at the notebook again. At his handwriting. The familiar curve of his R's, the slant of his T's. Don't let anyone think you're weak. Not even your son. I closed the planner, my hand steady on the cover. I wasn't weak. And my son was about to find that out. It had been years since I'd seen Todd Fisher. He was the one who helped us draft the will when my husband first got sick. A quiet man, neat as a pin, the kind who always smelled faintly of paper and wood polish. I remembered his office being small but orderly, every pen in its place, every file labeled just so. Back then, I sat beside my husband and tried to stay calm while Todd explained terms like durable power of attorney and joint tenancy. Now I was walking into that same building alone. The receptionist looked up as I entered, a young woman with soft curls and a voice that belonged on the radio. I told her my name. She smiled kindly and gestured toward the waiting area, where a pot of coffee sat on a warmer, half full. The room was quiet, save for the faint tick of a wall clock and the muffled hum of someone speaking behind a closed door. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. My hands didn't tremble. Not today. The door to the office opened, and there he was. Todd Fisher. A little grayer, maybe. But still with that air of calm certainty. He extended his hand. "Mrs. Langford. It's good to see you again." I nodded, holding his handshake firmly. "You helped us write everything down before my husband passed," I said. "I need to make sure what we wrote still holds." "Of course. Come in." His office hadn't changed much. Same dark green carpet. Same tidy bookshelf filled with legal manuals and framed photos. I noticed one new picture on his desk, his daughter, maybe, wearing a cap and gown. Todd gestured to the chair across from his and waited as I settled in. "How have you been?" he asked gently. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of the coffee, bitter and thin. I wasn't here for small talk. "Something's happened," I said. "With my son." He watched me for a moment, letting me speak on my own terms. That's something I always appreciated about him. I told him about the phone call. Not every word, but enough. Jessica's voice. David's agreement. Their plans. The talk of selling the house. The word burden. Todd didn't flinch. He nodded slowly and reached for a yellow legal pad. "Let's start with the basics. You and your husband purchased the home in '97. Correct?" "That's right. And after he passed, the deed transferred to you as sole owner, based on joint tenancy with right of survivorship." I nodded. "Then legally speaking," Todd said, "David and his wife have no claim over the property. They cannot sell it. They cannot force you to leave. They cannot access any equity without your consent." He paused, giving the word space to land. "The house is yours. Entirely." I exhaled, slow and deep. That's what I thought. But I needed to hear it from someone who knew. Todd leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. "Do you want to take any legal precautions?" "I'm thinking about selling," I said, and his eyebrows lifted just a little. "Is that something you've decided?" "I don't know yet. But I want to know what it would involve. How quickly? What paperwork? Who needs to be notified?" He nodded, jotting notes as I spoke. "You'd need a real estate agent, of course. A buyer, ideally one paying cash if time is a factor. I'd prepare the transfer documents and handle the title review. If you're serious, we could have everything ready within a few days." I stared at a framed painting on his wall, an autumn forest, trees shedding golden leaves. I remembered once walking through woods like that with my husband, our son running ahead, crunching every leaf he could. "And if I do sell," I asked, "how do I keep it quiet?" Todd didn't ask why. He didn't have to. His eyes softened a little. "You're under no obligation to inform your family until after the sale is final. If the deed is clean, and I believe it is, there's nothing they can contest." He handed me a sheet listing preliminary steps. Contact a trusted realtor. Order a current appraisal. Gather maintenance records if available. I studied the list. My mind was already ticking through it. "One more thing," I said. "If they try to contest later, to say I wasn't in my right mind. What proof do I need to show otherwise? Todd gave a small smile. Mrs. Langford, you're asking sharp, logical questions. You've managed your affairs for decades. You're sitting here calmly laying out a plan. You're not confused. You're focused. I nodded, a small knot in my chest loosening for the first time in days. He stood and walked me to the door. Take your time, Helen, he said. But know this, legally, you're in control. You always have been. I stepped back into the hallway, the paper warm in my hand. The sun had shifted by then, casting a wide beam across the lobby floor. Outside, I could see a woman my age walking her dog, waving to a neighbor. Just another Thursday. I turned toward the door and paused. They think I'm old. They think I'm slow. They think I'll go along because I love them. I do love them. But love doesn't mean surrender. I took another sip of the coffee before tossing the rest into the trash. It had gone cold. But I hadn't. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat for a moment, staring at the paper in my hand. A list of next steps. Concrete. Practical. Doable. I was done waiting to be handled. I had just begun to handle things myself. I took out my phone and opened the contacts list. Time to make another call. I sipped the last of my coffee and smiled. They think I'm slipping? Too soon to judge. Mark Connor showed up right on time. He pulled into the driveway in a silver hatchback, newer model, but not flashy. The kind of car that said efficient, not extravagant. I watched from the front window, standing just behind the curtain like I used to when David was out past curfew. Some habits never die, I guess. He stepped out with a leather folder tucked under one arm and a clean shirt tucked into dark jeans. Not too young, not too polished. That's what I liked about him. From our phone call earlier that morning, he'd sounded direct. Professional, but not cold. When he smiled as he rang the bell, it reached his eyes. That counted for something. I opened the door and held it with one hand, the other wrapped lightly around my hip. Mornings had started to stiffen my joints, though I never admitted that out loud. Mrs. Langford, he said. Thank you for meeting with me. Call me Helen, I replied, stepping aside. Come in. He paused just inside the door, his eyes scanning the entryway with practiced speed. The hardwood gleamed. I'd spent an hour that morning polishing every visible surface, even the brass doorknobs. The air still held a hint of lemon oil and lavender from the sachets I kept in the hallway drawers. This is lovely, he said, his voice genuine. Original woodwork? My husband did most of it himself, I answered, motioning toward the arched doorframe leading into the living room. Every board, every molding, every hinge. He nodded, running a hand lightly along the trim. That kind of detail's rare now. He walked slowly through the downstairs, taking notes on a tablet, occasionally stopping to snap photos. I followed a few paces behind, watching the way his head tilted when he examined the ceiling, or how he stepped deliberately on each section of the floor, listening for creaks. What year was this built? He asked. 97. We moved in that fall. Mark made another note, then glanced toward the bay window in the living room. That window's a showpiece, he said. Natural light like this? Buyers eat it up. My husband built that too, I said quietly. He measured the angles 3 times, cut each piece by hand. Said I deserved a place to read in the afternoons. He paused, as if taking that in, then gave a small nod. It shows. In the kitchen, he paused again, fingertips brushing the granite countertops. These are high-end. Original install? He picked the pattern. I wiped a spot that had collected a little dust. He said the gold veins reminded him of sunshine. Mark smiled faintly and turned to me. Helen, have you had the house appraised recently? Not officially, no. Well, I work with several private investment groups. Cash buyers. No financing, no delays. They specialize in properties exactly like this, established neighborhoods, well-maintained, custom details. I said nothing. Just listened. Based on current market trends, and after walking through, I'd price this between $875 and $900. Realistically, we can list at $890 and expect serious interest within days. My fingers tightened around the back of a kitchen chair. That's more than I expected. Your house is a gem, Helen. Buyers are looking for charm and craftsmanship. Not just square footage. This place has both. He glanced around again, then back at me. If you're thinking of moving quickly, I'd recommend we act soon. Inventory is low. Interest is high. It's the perfect moment. I looked past him toward the hallway. Past the door to David's old room. Past the staircase where he'd once tripped on a toy and burst into tears. Past the living room where he opened his first Christmas present, a set of wooden trains. My home. Our home. Built with calloused hands and quiet prayers. My eyes returned to Mark. How fast would it go? I asked. If we list this afternoon, he said, I can have private showings tomorrow. If a cash buyer makes an offer, we could close in 7 days. 10, at most. No open houses? Only if you want. But given your privacy, I'd advise against it. I can vet buyers before they step inside. And after the sale? Standard agreement gives you 30 days to vacate. But that's flexible. We can negotiate for longer, if needed. I nodded slowly. I'd rehearsed this moment, you know. Sat at the dining table with a legal pad the night before, listing pros and cons like some middle-aged executive. But standing there, in my kitchen, across from this man with a buyer waiting in the wings and numbers that felt surreal, I didn't feel powerful. I felt clear. Like someone had opened a window after a long, still winter. I walked to the counter, pulled open the drawer beneath the microwave, and took out the maintenance log I'd kept since day one. Dates of repairs. Paint colors. Appliance warranties. My husband's handwriting on the first 5 pages, mine after that. I handed it to Mark. This will help, I said. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. You're the kind of homeowner every buyer hopes for, he said. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked around the room one last time. The light had shifted. Mid-morning now, sharp and golden through the bay window. I could hear birds outside. Sparrows. Maybe finches. The kettle clicked off behind me. I'd left it heating when he arrived. I didn't move to pour. Instead, I turned to Mark. Let's do it. His face brightened, and he opened his folder to begin paperwork. While he filled out forms, I watched the way his pen moved, decisive, smooth. No hesitation. And I realized something. This was no longer my home. Not really. Not since they called me a burden. Not since they laughed about the value, like I was just part of the square footage. I was making the decision. I was setting the terms. Mark handed me a pen. I signed where he pointed. We shook hands. He promised next steps by morning. I walked him to the door, watched as he drove off. Then I closed the door and leaned against it for a long, quiet moment. My house was worth $890,000. To them, it was a transaction. To me, it had been everything. But now? Now, it was leverage. I nodded. And in that moment, the house stopped being a home. It became a chess piece. I bought the camera online. Tiny, black, shaped like a phone charger. No blinking lights. No noise. Just a silent little eye tucked into what looked like an ordinary wall plug. It arrived in a brown envelope, no branding, just my name and address printed in neat black ink. I held it in my palm that morning. It felt heavier than it looked. Maybe because of what it meant. The sun hadn't fully risen yet. Light was slipping in sideways through the curtains, casting long shadows across the hallway tile. I'd already had my coffee, standing barefoot at the kitchen counter, the cup warm in both hands, the bitter taste steadying. After rinsing the cup, I moved down the hallway, every step quiet, like I didn't want to disturb the house itself. I crouched by the outlet near the entryway table, the one right across from the door. The perfect line of sight. The perfect trap. I plugged the device in. The tiny lens faced outward. Unblinking. Patient. It made the softest click as it turned on. Barely a whisper. I stood back up and stared at it for a moment. It looked so ordinary. Like any other charger. No one would notice. Not unless they were looking. And David never looked. Not really. The camera would start recording the moment it sensed motion. I'd be able to watch from my phone, from wherever I was. I didn't need to be here anymore. I just needed the truth to stay behind. Then I walked to the dining room, pulled out the drawer beneath the built-in hutch, and took out my stationery set. Thick ivory paper. A fountain pen my husband gave me the Christmas after David was born. The nib still smooth, still a little stained with blue ink from years past. I sat at the table. The house was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I could hear the soft creak of the fridge settling. My own breath. Then I wrote. Dear David. The pen moved slowly, steadily. No crossouts. No second guesses. I told him what I'd heard. That I had not hung up the phone. That I had heard every word, his, Jessica's. I told him the house had been sold. That the paperwork was signed. The money was no longer tied to brick and wood and memory. It was now numbers in an account only I could touch. I told him the things they had left behind, books, coats, old photos in the guest room drawers, had been boxed and moved to storage. He could call the number listed at the bottom to arrange a pickup. I reminded him of something else too. This was my house. My name was the only one on the deed. And I had every legal right to do what I had done. I did not write with anger. I wrote with clarity. Not, how could you? Not, why did you? Just, this is what I know. This is what I did. This is what happens now. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully. Slid it into an envelope. Wrote his name in my neatest handwriting. David Langford. I stood up and walked to the front door. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender and wood. The floor beneath my feet was smooth, cool. The house had already begun to feel different. Like it was holding its breath. I taped the envelope to the front door. Eye level. Right where they'd see it the second they tried to open the lock. I stepped back. Looked at it for a long moment. And then I reached into the closet, pulled out my old suitcase, the one I'd used to visit my sister in Arizona years ago, and started packing. I didn't take much. A few outfits. My planner. My husband's notebook. The old jewelry box he'd given me on our 25th anniversary. I moved slowly through the house, closing drawers, folding memories into silence. I opened the windows for a moment, just to let the air shift. Outside, birds were chirping. The street was still. I left the kettle out on the stove, just like always. Left the throw blanket draped over the back of the recliner. I wanted them to feel like I might come back. But I wouldn't. Not here. I took one last look at the camera in the hallway. It sat there, small and still. Waiting. It would see them before I did. I stepped outside. Pulled the door shut. The latch clicked quietly. No one on the street saw me. No neighbors waved. It felt like slipping out the back of a theater before the lights came on. I stood for a second, looking at the door. At the envelope. It fluttered a little in the breeze. I didn't shake. Not this time. There was no anger left. Only certainty. They had underestimated me. Because they'd mistaken silence for surrender. But I wasn't surrendering. I was just getting started. I taped that letter to the door. Not with trembling fingers. Not with doubt. Just with purpose. I taped that letter to the door. No shaking. No regret. Only necessity. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and fabric softener. I'd only been there 2 nights, but already I knew how the light moved through the windows at dawn and how the hallway echoed when the elevator doors opened. It was small. Efficient. Clean. Just a kitchen, a bedroom, and a view of a brick alley where pigeons gathered in the afternoon sun. I sat at the little round table by the window, a warm mug between my palms, and stared at my phone. The screen glowed softly. The camera app was open. Friday. 3:17 p.m. They were back. The flight from Vancouver must have landed an hour ago. Just enough time for them to grab their bags, take a car, maybe stop for coffee. I could imagine it, their voices light, Jessica's laugh filling in the silence where David didn't speak. And then the familiar shape of David's car eased into the driveway. My breath caught. Not because I was afraid. But because something inside me, some old reflex, still flinched at the thought of hurting him. I watched the camera feed. The video wasn't sharp, but I could see them clearly enough. David got out first. His blazer was slung over one shoulder, his tie loose. Jessica stepped out next, sunglasses on, hair pulled back, a sleek weekender bag over one arm. She looked refreshed. Unbothered. David reached into his pocket. Pulled out his key. They were both smiling. I leaned forward slightly. He slid the key into the lock. Paused. Turned. Nothing. He tried again. This time with more force. Jessica tilted her head, arms crossed. I saw her lips move. He jiggled the key. Checked the address. Looked down at the doormat, like maybe something was different. It wasn't. Except everything was. I sipped my tea. He tried again. Turned the knob. Looked at Jessica. Shrugged. Jessica stepped forward. Took the key from him and tried it herself. 3 times. Then a 4th. Still nothing. David's shoulders dropped. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone. Dialed. My own phone buzzed softly where it lay beside my mug. I didn't move. On the screen, I watched his face twist slowly from confusion into something sharper. Jessica turned, scanning the porch. Her eyes landed on the envelope taped to the door. She pulled it down. Opened it. Her hands stilled. David looked over her shoulder, reading. The change was instant. He stepped back, mouth moving quickly, then grabbed the phone again. Another call. The phone on my table buzzed once more. Still, I didn't move. On the screen, David was pacing. One hand on his hip, the other still gripping the phone. Jessica stood frozen, the letter dangling from her fingers, her mouth slightly open. They looked at the door again. Then the window. Then each other. I knew that look. It was the same one he had as a child when he broke something and tried to hide it. When he was caught in a lie and waited to see if I would believe him anyway. The panic was setting in now. Jessica reached out, touched his arm. Her lips were tight. She said something sharp. David gestured toward the door. Toward the house. My house. No. Not anymore. I watched his hands move through the air, helpless and angry. He pulled his phone up again, started typing. A message this time. My phone lit up with it. Mom, what's going on? I read it. Didn't reply. Another one. Is this a mistake? I stared at those words for a long time. Mistake. No, David. This is the first thing I've done right in a very long time. Jessica had sat down on the top step, her head in her hands. David stood with his back to the door, shoulders tight. His phone at his ear again. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't get in. Couldn't undo. Couldn't understand how the woman they thought they could quietly push aside had somehow outpaced them. My tea had gone cold. I set it aside. My hands were calm. My chest was calm. But something deeper was stirring. Not victory. Not yet. Just a stillness. Like when you finally shut a door that should have closed years ago. I watched David through the screen. Watched the panic rise in his face. The disorientation. The realization. He looked so small standing there. And for the first time in his life, I didn't rush to him. I didn't open the door. I didn't soften. I didn't save. I watched my son flail through a truth he never thought would arrive. And I stayed exactly where I was. I watched David unravel through the screen. And for the first time, I didn't run to hold him. It was just after 6 when the motion alert pinged my phone again. I was washing dishes at the new place, hands deep in warm, soapy water, the faint smell of citrus from the detergent rising with each swirl. Outside the window, the street was quiet. A dog barked in the distance. Someone walked by with grocery bags rustling. It felt like any other evening. Still. Predictable. But I knew what was coming. I dried my hands slowly, wiped the sink rim with the edge of a towel, and picked up my phone. The camera feed lit up instantly. Jessica was crouched at the side of the house. Her hair had come loose, strands falling across her cheek. She kept glancing over her shoulder while David stood nearby, arms crossed, scanning the street like he expected someone to stop them. He wouldn't know it, but the side window, they both knew the one, was left slightly ajar. That was no accident. When she finally slid it up and climbed inside, I almost smiled. She didn't hesitate. That's what struck me. No pause. No guilt. Just urgency. Like a woman trying to outrun something, only to realize she was already too late. A few seconds later, the front door opened from the inside. David stepped in fast, slamming it shut behind him. The letter still lay on the hallway table where Jessica had dropped it earlier. The white paper looked even starker against the polished wood. Unmoved. Unbothered. He grabbed it. Read it again. Jessica stood just a few feet away, arms crossed, waiting. And then it started. First, just a wave of voices. His louder than hers. Then hers sharper. Piercing. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see everything. Every gesture. Every point of the finger. Every step forward and backward like a dance choreographed by regret. David threw the letter onto the floor. It fluttered once before landing by the rug. His hands were flying now, slicing through the air. Jessica responded with a shrug and a bitter laugh. I recognized that laugh. I'd heard it at Thanksgiving once, when she didn't like the casserole I made. She walked past him into the living room. He followed, still talking. Still pleading. Still trying to rewrite the script after the curtain had already dropped. She picked something up from the coffee table, maybe a coaster, maybe a framed photo, and set it down again too hard. He paced. Ran a hand through his hair. Looked up at the ceiling like he expected answers to drop down from the beams. Jessica turned to him then, face hard, arms at her sides. She said something that stopped him in his tracks. He looked stunned. Then furious. He shouted back, stepping toward her. She took one step back, chin raised. And just like that, the dam broke. They were arguing in full now, mouths moving fast, words crashing over each other like waves in a storm. David pointed toward the door. Jessica jabbed a finger at the hallway. He turned in circles, hands on his hips. She folded her arms tight, biting her lips so hard I thought she might draw blood. On the floor, near the threshold, one of David's old sneakers sat alone. Just one. The other had been packed months ago into a storage bin he'd forgotten. But this one? It was here. Still waiting. Until now. Jessica picked it up and threw it against the wall. It bounced. Fell. David didn't flinch. He was frozen now, hands limp at his sides, eyes empty. She yelled something else. He sat down. Right there, on the edge of the couch. Shoulders hunched. Head in his hands. And she stood above him, her arms crossed again, like she'd finally won a battle she didn't want anymore. I sat in my quiet apartment, watching the silent feed, and my heart didn't race. Not the way it used to when David was a child and fell off his bike. Not the way it did when he once came home drunk, red-eyed and ashamed, and I had to keep my voice even. No, this was different. I was watching the collapse from a distance. And this time, I wasn't part of the wreckage. Jessica left the room, disappearing toward the back of the house. David didn't move. Just sat there, staring at the space in front of him, like maybe if he stayed still long enough, the house would start speaking again. But it wouldn't. Because the house wasn't his anymore. Not the walls. Not the air. Not the memories they had tried to commodify. It belonged to the silence now. To the stillness. To the moment they realized they had played the wrong hand with the wrong woman. The camera caught everything. Every flicker of their eyes. Every twitch of a jaw. Every breath heavy with disbelief. And it caught what they didn't say, too. It caught the spaces between. The regret. The truth. The storm they had unleashed and could no longer contain. They had returned expecting warmth, maybe surprise, maybe a scolding laced with forgiveness. What they got was absence. A home emptied not just of furniture, but of permission. I watched them move through the rooms, shouting into echoes that no longer answered. The camera feed dipped slightly with the light as the sun slipped lower outside the window. The hallway turned gold. Jessica re-emerged, her arms now full of coats and boxes and anger. David stayed seated, unmoving, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate heaviness. And for a split second, he looked like a boy again. One who'd lost something he didn't know how to get back. The house was quiet. But inside them, there was a storm. I returned to the house one last time as the sun dipped low, the afternoon light liquefying into gold. I stood in the driveway, watching my reflection in the dusty windshield, and wondered if I'd ever felt this weight before. Inside, the rooms were quiet. The echoes of laughter and arguments had faded, replaced by emptiness and polished floors. I walked slowly through each space, letting the light guide me. The kitchen held a faint scent of lemon oil, the one I used to keep the cabinets gleaming. The dining table carried its usual place setting on my side, a leftover habit, even when no one sat across from me. I knelt near the corner of the living room where I kept family photos. I picked up a faded framed snapshot of David and his father fishing at the lake. Their smiles were bright in sunlight, oblivious to the years it would take to fracture everything behind them. I tucked it carefully into my bag. In the bedroom I found my husband's watch in his jewelry box. I clipped it to my purse strap, its ticking strangely comforting. Next to it lay the novel he never finished, its page marked by his impossible-to-miss bookmark at 247. I slipped it inside the book bag I carried. I moved to the study, where soldered board after board during the house's construction stood silent on the shelf. I picked up the small wood plane he used for the trim, resting it inside a cloth bag I'd brought. Each object I packed felt like a memory being pulled forward into my own hands, away from this silent shell of betrayal. I sat on the edge of the recliner in the living room and closed my eyes. I could hear his voice again, telling me I deserved better. Could feel David's small hand in mine. The scent of evening rain seeped through the open window and filled the house. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the same sound they'd made when David first learned to walk. I exhaled a slow breath. My chest felt empty in the best way, free from tangles of obligation. I packed the last of my suitcase by torchlight from the hall lamp. A few clothes, my planner, and the old freestanding mirror I'd bought when we moved in. I looked at it one final time and saw a face I no longer belonged to this place. Outside, crickets sang low. The sun made its final descent, painting everything in shades of farewell. I gathered the suitcase and my other things, pausing at the door. My hand turned the brass knob, cool against my palm. I took one step inside, then another, listening one last time for the silence I once called home. Then I locked the door. The click echoed through the empty hall, louder than any smile or scream had ever been. I walked to my car and climbed in, trunk loaded with fragments of a life rewritten. I paused, looked through the rearview mirror. The house stood there, golden in the sunset, quiet. And I realized something hadn't changed. This was the first time I didn't want to look back. I locked the door, for the last time. And for the very first time, I didn't want to go back. The apartment smelled new. Not sterile, not cold, just unfamiliar in a way that hinted at fresh beginnings. The walls were painted a soft cream, and the morning sun spilled across the laminate floors, warming everything it touched. A tiny balcony opened to a view of low, rustling trees and parked cars lined neatly on the curb. Sunset Grove wasn't fancy, but it was kind. Quiet hallways. Potted plants outside every third door. A lady 2 doors down always left out a bowl of water for stray cats. I set my grocery bag down on the small kitchen counter. Just a few things: eggs, apples, a loaf of multigrain bread, and my favorite jam, apricot. I opened the fridge, humming low under my breath, and placed each item in its new home. The refrigerator made a soft clicking sound when I closed it. Satisfying, like finishing a thought. I'd never lived alone. Not truly. I'd gone from my father's house to my husband's. From shared toothbrush holders to sock drawers split down the middle. For years, every step I took was paired with someone else's echo. Now there were none. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. Not anymore. The afternoon air drifted in through the screen door. I sat down at the small round table by the window, a single-place mat laid out like it had always been waiting for me. I made tea. Chamomile this time. Poured it into my blue ceramic mug with the tiny chip near the handle. I ran my finger over the chip absently as I stared out the window. The sun painted the tops of the cars gold. I had a list taped to the fridge. Open new checking account. Change mailing address at the post office. Introduce self to building manager. I'd already checked off 2. The third, I did later that day. Martin, the manager, was a short man with a warm grin and a cane he used more for emphasis than support. He wore plaid every day, according to the lady with the cats. Said he used to be a carpenter, but now he just keeps the lights on. He offered to help me with the laundry machines. I said I could manage. That made him smile. You'll like it here, he said. We don't move too fast, but we don't sit still either. I liked that. On Saturday, I went for a walk. There was a small cafe at the end of the block, with uneven bricks leading up to the door and a bell that chimed sweetly when I pushed it open. Inside smelled of cinnamon and fresh espresso. A young woman behind the counter greeted me with a practiced, cheerful voice. Her name was Ria. She had short curls and eyes that reminded me of honey. First time here? She asked. Just moved in down the street, I said. Thought I'd see what all the good smells were about. She laughed and offered me a punch card. Every 6th coffee is free, she said. That's how we keep people loyal. I ordered a black coffee and a cranberry scone. Took a seat by the window and let the afternoon drift around me like a soft shawl. People passed. Couples. Kids on scooters. An older man with a poodle wearing a raincoat, though the sky was clear. I pulled out a notepad. Just a small one, the kind I used to carry in my purse for grocery lists. But this time, I didn't write errands. I wrote memories. Not because I missed them. but because I didn't want to forget who I'd been before everything twisted sideways. I wrote about the first time I saw David's heartbeat on an ultrasound. About the way my husband used to hum while brushing his teeth. About the time the furnace broke and we spent a whole night wrapped in blankets, laughing. I didn't write about the betrayal. Not yet. That would come later. Back in the apartment, I lit a candle that smelled like pine and citrus. I folded laundry with the windows open. I called my sister and let her talk about her tomatoes for 20 minutes. I downloaded a podcast someone at the cafe recommended about unsolved mysteries. I didn't understand half the slang, but I listened anyway. At night, I lay in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin and stared at the ceiling. The quiet pressed in, soft and steady. There was no creak of footsteps from down the hall. No voice calling from another room. No one waiting on the other side of my decisions. Just me. And the hum of the fridge. And the warmth of my own breath in the dark. It wasn't lonely. Not really. Because for the first time, every part of this life was something I had chosen. Even the stillness. Even the chipped mug. Even the silence. I hadn't been cast aside. I had stepped out. Deliberately. Cleanly. It took decades to learn that sometimes starting over doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it comes with the sound of a kettle whistling. The thump of a newspaper hitting the door. The clink of your own fork against your own plate. I looked around at the modest furniture, the blank wall waiting for pictures I hadn't hung yet, the book I'd started and would actually finish this time. And I whispered, half laughing to myself. So this is what it's like. I had never lived alone before. But it turns out, it wasn't as scary as I thought. The message came just after 8. I was in the kitchen, roasting a small chicken, just for me. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled the air, warm and grounding. I'd set the table with one plate, one cloth napkin, and my favorite wine glass, the one with the delicate stem I always thought would break but never did. The phone buzzed against the counter. David. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the screen. At his name. My thumb hovered for a moment, then pulled away. Whatever it was, an apology, a plea, a demand, I didn't want it. Not tonight. Not in this room, with the smell of something good in the oven and soft jazz playing low from the radio by the sink. I picked up the phone. And powered it off. The silence that followed wasn't sharp or cold. It was clean. Like wiping the last streak off a mirror and seeing yourself clearly. I pulled down a bottle of red wine from the top shelf. It was the one my husband had bought years ago for our 30th anniversary but never opened. We'd kept saving it for the right moment. For a celebration. I guess I finally understood what that meant. The cork slid out with a soft pop. I poured a generous glass. The wine swirled dark and slow. At the table, I placed my napkin in my lap and sliced into the chicken. The skin crisped perfectly. I'd basted it twice and seasoned it just right. With the first bite, I felt something inside me unclench. I wasn't eating alone. I was eating freely. After dinner, I rinsed the plate and left it in the drying rack. I dimmed the lights in the kitchen and carried my wine glass to the small armchair near the window. The night had settled outside. The city glowed soft gold and orange. Car lights flickered below like fireflies. Somewhere, someone played piano from another apartment. I couldn't see them. But the notes drifted gently through the wall, faint and steady. I curled my toes under the blanket and rested my chin on the edge of the glass before taking another sip. It was dry, bold. He would have loved it. I thought about David again. Not with anger. Not even sadness. Just distance. The kind that grows not from miles, but from choices. He had made his. And I had finally made mine. I used to wonder what made someone a burden. Was it age? Slowness? Need? But no. That wasn't it. It was how others looked at you. Spoke about you. Planned around you like you were furniture to be moved, managed, ignored. For a long time, I let myself be looked at that way. Until I stopped. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the tiny photo album I'd put together last week. Just the essentials. My husband on our honeymoon, sunburnt and beaming. David as a baby, wrapped in yellow. The dog we had for 15 years, who followed me from room to room until the very end. I ran my fingers over the plastic sleeve. Smiled. Then I took another sip of wine. Outside, the wind picked up. A tree branch scratched lightly against the windowpane. The city hummed below me. I was still here. Still standing. Still choosing. I used to think peace came with people. With approval. With belonging. But sometimes, peace is solitude. It's a warm plate at a quiet table. A locked phone. A book waiting to be opened. A new recipe with too much butter. It's knowing no one gets to rewrite your ending. No one gets to label you something you're not. It's one woman, in a modest apartment, sipping red wine while the world rolls on outside. Unbothered. Unowned. Unburdened. I drank the last of the glass slowly. Felt the warmth bloom in my chest, not from alcohol, but from something deeper. I wasn't what they said. I never was. I just forgot for a while. And now, finally, I remembered. I emptied the glass. Set it on the windowsill. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden anymore.